A very warm welcome to everybody and good afternoon. A very exciting time to talk about this subject on overcoming the challenges on the path to net zero. And today we have two very interesting guest speakers to talk about this topic with very different perspective. One of a policymaker in the United Kingdom, an illustrious participant in the environmental and sustainability topics. And the second one with a more practical view on the application with electric vehicles and buses in the context of city transportation with RATP development. So again, also a very interesting moment in time to have this conversation, considering the announcement last week by our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, of his 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, which I am sure Lord Deben and Catherine will touch upon. I'm Jean-Philippe Verdier. I'm the co-chair of the Climate Change Forum with Nidhi Baiswar. And this is now the 10th year exactly on this webinar that we started this, this forum and this think tank amongst the French Chamber of Commerce. As you can see on the slide, more than 70 events have taken place, over 100 hours of debates, 100 different guest speakers, 2,500 participants, and with a view of being very practical and implementable for businesses, taking insight from a lot of market participants across NGOs, policymakers, businesses, and many different business. And as you can see also, we've started to create the opportunity for exchange and collaboration and learning via site visits, but also, for instance, a leaflet for SME companies for whom, as soon as 2016, talking about climate change and sustainability was very avant-garde, but for whom today it's obviously a core to their business. So without further ado, let me just introduce you to our two guest speakers today. Lord Deben, environment and sustainability are not really a new topic for you. You were Secretary of State to the Environment for 3 years, starting in 1993. And actually, the BBC Wildlife has described you as the environmental secretary against which all others are to be judged. And on the personal front, you have been also a prolific writer, and we look forward to hearing from you on your current activities and particularly your independent advisor as the chair of the Committee on Climate Change to the UK government. Catherine Chardon has been Managing Director of RATP Development London since 2018. And you actually started your career well over 25 years ago with RATP in the HR department, having leadership roles there. But also you led a few business units of RATP, both in France, in Switzerland, and in the USA. And in London, when we take a bus, it's more than probable that we'll be on a RATP bus and that it will be an electric bus. So a very interesting time to talk about this topic. Just as a matter of introduction, each guest speaker will have about 15 minutes to present a couple of topics. And then we'll swiftly move on to moderated Q&A session. So please feel free to look at the Q&A box on your screen, and please do not hesitate to put your questions there, and we look forward to that second part of the conversation. Thank you very much. Lord Deben, it's yours.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here. You asked me to start off by explaining a little bit about how we do these things in the United Kingdom, because the Climate Change Committee is wholly different from anything that went before, although there are now, I think, 12 or 13 countries that have gone in some direction to follow us, including France. And I'm pleased to say that the chairman of the French Climate Change Committee is a member of my committee and was before she was appointed to that. And I'm very pleased to have that link with France. As a passionate European, I continue to be that, even in the sad moments of this present period. We in the Climate Change Committee operate under the Climate Change Act, which was a very unusual act. It was proposed by the opposition of the time, which was a conservative opposition. And then all the opposition parties joined together, and the government discovered that it would lose a vote because at least 100 of its own supporters wanted this act. And as a result, we got the government to introduce it, and it became an all-party proposition. And right from the beginning, this has been a cross-party concept. We're very fortunate in that because it is wholly different from Australia or the United States, for example, or indeed to some extent Canada, because those countries all have a left-right divide, which we don't have at all. And so the committee was set up, and the whole idea was to get over the fundamental political problem that every 4 or 5 years, politicians need their mandate refreshed if democracy is to work. On the other hand, climate change isn't something that you can keep on changing about. You've got to have a policy which will lead you to a position in which you begin, first of all, to reduce and then to reverse the effects of climate change. And so what we tried to do was to invent an entirely new process, which is what we now have. And that is that the Climate Change Committee produces a carbon budget in 5-year tranches. We're now about to produce the 6th carbon budget, which will be presented on in very early December. And therefore we've had 5. And what we do is to present that to Parliament. And when Parliament has discussed it and debated on it and voted on it, it then can't be changed unless the Climate Change Committee agrees, which means that the Parliament has its democratic control. It could say, I don't like that budget, I want something different. But if it agrees, then a future Parliament can't change it without actually repealing the Climate Change Act. And for that, you'd need a very large majority, and it would be very hard to do it. So this locks the system in a quite unique way, and not something I think we would agree to in any other circumstance. So that means that we produce this 5-year budget well in advance. We're now just finishing the 3rd carbon budget period. We'll move into the 4th carbon budget, but already, as I say, we're going to present the 6th carbon budget, which will take us more or less to the end of the 2030s. So that really means that we'll be within striking distance of 2050, where again, we have a legal obligation to have brought our emissions down to net zero. Each of these budgets, therefore, is a statutory requirement. And if the government doesn't meet it, then it is open to the courts to declare that it isn't meeting it and therefore lay down what it has to do so. Not something governments like, and not something governments will want to do. And so far, governments have avoided themselves finding themselves in court. And so the committee is entirely independent. It isn't representative except of scientists and economists. It has very prominent scientists with appropriate qualifications. We've had Nobel Prize winners and the like, and at least two economists, because we need to make sure that we can afford these things, that we know how to do it, and therefore that's very important. I'm the only person on the committee who is neither scientist nor an economist. I suppose my expertise is in agriculture, not only having a farm, but also having been Minister or Deputy Minister of Agriculture in Britain for perhaps the longest time ever, which is about 7 years. So I have spent a lot of time talking about agriculture with the French, soon discovered that in the European Union, if Britain and France were on the same side, we usually won on agriculture. So I tried to make sure that that normally happened. But the truth is that what I do bring is the job of trying to make sure that what we say is comprehensible to the normal individual. Because the trouble sometimes with science is that it is very difficult for a normal individual to come to terms with, to understand, to realize what it means. And I sit as a Conservative in the House of Lords, but I was chosen as the chairman by a Liberal Democrat minister in the House of Commons when there was a coalition government, by the First Minister of Scotland, who was a Scots nationalist, the First Minister of Wales, who was a socialist, and the First Minister of the North of Ireland, who was a Protestant unionist. And they got a Conservative and a Catholic, so they did quite well, really, in independent position. So what we seek to do, therefore, is to set the terms by which we will achieve our ends, which is, as I say, net zero in 2050. We are, of course, also asked to do other things. Every year we have to report independently on how well the government is meeting its requirements. And we're pretty tough on that, and we're becoming increasingly tough, because we're not just reporting on the government as a whole, but we're reporting on each ministry, each department, to point out what they should have done and what they haven't done and what they have done. The list of what they haven't done is very often longer than the list of what they have done, and it's a very good way of bringing home to people just how much has to be done to achieve these ends. We're also asked to do individual jobs. For example, it was we who decided on the terms of net zero. We were asked, could we do it? If we could do it, how much would it cost? And also, if we could do it and we knew how much it would cost, how long would it take? And we therefore said that we couldn't do it earlier than, but we could do it by 2050, that we could do it at a cost somewhere between 0.5% and 2% of the gross national product, and that we could in fact do it effectively and efficiently. And that is the basis upon which the sixth carbon budget is being created. It will be a much closer, tighter route map by which government and civil society, businesses and individuals can work towards net zero. But obviously, the government also wants to know what should it do internationally. And so two things happen. One is it asks us to recommend what it should give as the British contribution to the international Paris effort. And it also, from time to time, asks us to do other things. And above all, we now have an additional job, which is to work closely with our colleagues in other countries in order that we can do this together. Because obviously what Britain does is only part of the story. We're a very small proportion, perhaps just over 1% of the world's emissions, but that still doesn't excuse us from setting an example and doing for our emissions what needs to be done. And I want to concentrate on that for a moment, because it seems to me that Britain, like France and other developed countries, have got to recognize that we have a particular responsibility. Because after all, we have caused climate change. Britain was the first to cause it because the Industrial Revolution very much started in Britain. But France wasn't far behind, and we have fought with each other in competitive terms ever since. And it is true that maybe that now we aren't the biggest emitters, but historically we have been responsible, our two nations and our neighbours, we have been responsible for much of the change that has taken place. And we have benefited from it. We are rich because of it. Pollution has paid dividends. And we now have to recognize that we have to pay the cost of putting the world back to where it ought to be. And that is part of what Paris decided. Not only that we had to make sure that the temperature rise was not more than 2 degrees, and preferably to get it down as far towards 1.5 as possible. But what Paris also decided was that we really had to pay the price so that developing nations would not be penalized, but could jump the dirty period of development and could become richer without costing the earth. And that's what we now have to work out in the next meeting of the COP26, which is supposed to ratchet up what was decided in Paris. Now, Paris was the most remarkable achievement, and I shall never cease to congratulate the French and the French government for what they did, because it was an achievement which the French actually could lay claim to. They worked incredibly hard. They spent enormous amounts of energy getting people in line. I don't think we'd ever have achieved it without what they did. And therefore, Paris is a very important example to Glasgow and to Britain's efforts, which the Prime Minister is now going to have to lead in November, December next year. Thank God it has been put forward a year, because I'm not sure anybody would have been really ready for it otherwise. And of course, the great achievement, which is not our achievement, but I really do think almost intervention, is that we will be faced with an American president who believes in the science, who has a long history of environmental support, and who has appointed John Kerry as his climate envoy. Now, this is a really valuable thing. John was the man who signed the Paris Agreement on behalf of the United States, and you will remember the pictures of him signing it with his grandchild on his knee, making the point that he was signing it for the future. And I am utterly thrilled that we're now going to have a United States. And I'm rather pleased that Mr. Biden, I'm sure, entirely unwittingly has taken on the line which I've been using for some days, which is that America has rejoined the world. And this is, I think, what we have to accept. So it's going to be very tough, but we've got a very good beginning to it, because not only the Biden result in the United States, but the fact that China has signed up to a net zero target, the fact that South Korea has joined with the similar target, a rather earlier date, and that Japan, very excitingly and unexpectedly, has also signed up. So if you put the nations together and imagine that the United States will be in the forefront and regather its leadership, we really do start off with a very good chance of making Glasgow a success. But in order to get there, we actually have to show that example ourselves. And of course, the 10-point plan, which was announced, is one which I was able to be enthusiastic in my reception. I think this is rather surprising, given that this is not a government which I naturally approve. My views have always been rather different. But I am able to be enthusiastic about that 10-point plan, partly because it is a 10-point plan. In other words, it covers almost the whole range of the issues that we have to deal with. Partly too, because it's done something which we haven't seen for a long time, indeed, perhaps never. It's actually got some dates in it by which time things have to be done, which are pretty soon. In other words, politicians, and I feel myself a former politician rather than a politician, politicians are very good at promising things which will occur after they have ceased to be in office. What you promise for anything after 2040 has a certain hollowness in my view. But if you say by 2023, we are going to install some very tough new home standards for any houses that are built. If you say that by 2028, we are going to be installing 600,000 air source heat pumps in homes in Britain, if you say that by 2030, we will have a situation in which no cars can be sold which are not electric or equivalent, then you are promising things which are within your political term of reference. And that's the second reason why I think it's very valuable. The third reason is that there are some really tough and important promises and policies and money, very important, to reach towards that, not least the determination to refit very large numbers of homes in Britain. This is a crucially important thing because one of our biggest emitters now are heating for homes, and that will be a very important change which will be made. So that is, for me, absolutely crucial. So let me finish with perhaps some wider considerations. Yes, we in the rich countries have to pay the bill, and we have to do better than anyone in meeting our obligations. Yes, the government of Britain, like the government of France, have recognized and accepted their role. But there are three other things which I think we have to recognize. First of all, there is urgency of a kind which is still not felt in the capitals of Europe and throughout the world. This is not something that you can leave. We have to do it now, partly because climate change isn't waiting for us. We've lost control of that. Partly because it's much cheaper to do it now and really rather expensive if you leave it off. And certainly because every month you don't do it, the situation becomes worse and the problem that you have becomes greater. So urgency is a crucial part of the way in which we should look at it. And secondly, I think we have to recognize what a broad base is the battle fought. I said that I thought that the 10 points were very good because they covered so much, but they don't cover it all. They are very remiss in not dealing with land use. One of the issues that both Britain and France are going to have is how do we restore the fertility of our soils, which have been denuded by modern agricultural techniques, and that means that they no longer sequestrate the carbon which they once did and which they need to do. And that does mean very significant land use changes, which will be very difficult in any country. If there's a single advantage on our leaving the European Union, and I find it very hard to say that, but if there is, it is possibly that we will be quicker at moving our agricultural support system in order to ensure that it's less about production and much more about restoring the soil, quicker than the European Union is going to find it possible to reform the CAP. But the EU has got to reform the CAP in that direction, whether we like it or not, because that is the future. And also, we've got to recognize that part of that is restoring the ability of the seas to sequestrate. And that means dealing with fishing. I am really fed up with the discussions about fishing. I used to say when I was fishing ministers, I wasn't the fishing minister or the fish minister. I was the fisherman's minister. That's what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to defend the fishermen, and that meant pretending that we had fish we hadn't got in order to share them out with other people who also were sharing out fish we hadn't got. This argument about fish is largely fraudulent on all sides. It is a political nonsense. And the real issue is not about fish. It's about how do we restore the ability of the oceans, the ability of the North Sea, of the English Channel, of the Irish Sea, of the areas around Europe. How do we restore their ability both to produce fish and to sequestrate carbon? And that means some pretty tough words for the fishermen, particularly those that drag along the bottoms. And the last thing I want to do is to leave with you a single sentence and thought from the most important document on climate change there is, which is the Pope's encyclical Laudato Si. If you don't read anything else about climate change, that is the thing to read. It's beautifully written, it's very short, and it covers the whole matter in the most effective way. And at its heart is a remark which the Pope makes, which no one else has made, but which does seem to me to be the central issue. He says, climate change is the symptom of what we have done to the world. And that means that we have to attack the disease. The disease is the disease that we have been greedy about the land which we've used, that we have polluted the earth and we have polluted the sky. We have thought about our own interests and not those of the poorest. We have to bring all that together if we are to deal with the symptom, because we have to cure that disease. So it's a very big job that we have, and we're going to have to do it effectively. The next step after the great step of Paris, the next step in Glasgow.
Lord Deben, many thanks for that. A lot of food for thought, a lot of question, at least from me, and I'm sure will come from the audience. So many thanks indeed for sharing the whole of that knowledge and viewpoint. I will turn to Catherine. Good luck, Catherine, to meet that level. But we've got all our thoughts with you because I've seen your slide and it's going to be extremely exciting. So thank you very much.
So I guess you can see my slides. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I take the advice from Lord Deben that slides confuse everyone. So I tried to make something quite simple and say what's the most important in my speech. Thank you, Lord Deben, for building a bridge between Paris and London, because I'm going to do the same because my group is originally the headquarter is Paris-based. As you all know, RATP is Paris-based. So I'm the managing director for RATP Dev London, and it is part of RATP Group, and we take climate change and sustainability very seriously. We tend and we try to do our part, Lord Deben, and we can have a conversation about that after. RATP Group is the 5th largest multimodal public transport operator in the world, operating in 13 countries across the world, and we are all doing our part to address local environmental challenges. In today's presentation, I will start talking about what is happening in Paris RATP, because it's a reference with our mother company, where it is based and operates. And then I will describe some of the ways we are contributing to climate change more locally in London. As a group, if I can change my slide, hope you see it. Yes? No, you don't see my slide, which is not good. So, yep. You see it. Thank you. As a group, RATP is a major player in creating smart and sustainable cities. Through projects and development around the world, the group aims to develop the use of public transport to reduce its energy and carbon footprint. Public transport, and in particular Paris at RATP in Paris, is primarily at the service of cities. However, cities are suffering the brunt of the effects of climate change, such as floods, heat waves, and account for 3/4 of the world's CO2 emissions. Public transport is sustainable by nature. In the Greater Paris, Île-de-France region alone, RATP network in Paris has emitted 60 times less CO2 when a person takes the tube or suburban train or buses rather than using their car. Finally, as a business, RATP Group mobilized to go even further towards more sustainable and easier to live in cities. RATP strive to improve mobility solutions and performance by offering all modes of transport, as you can see, really helping us to reduce our environmental footprint, meet our commitments to improving public health, and cut down our own energy consumption. In 2017, RATP set itself new goals for 2025 compared to the goals they defined in 2015. You know, the length of time that we can see, and then we can achieve. Reduce its energy consumption by passenger kilometer by 20%, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions per passenger kilometer by 50%. To achieve this, the company has set up an action plan for all of its activities: passenger transport, buildings, infrastructure, passenger routes, and auxiliary vehicle fleets. In 2017, RATP became the first multimodal transport operator to obtain ISO 50001 certification in energy management for all of its activities and networks in Île-de-France region. By 2018, just a year after RATP has set up its goals, RATP had already reduced its energy consumptions by 6% and its greenhouse gas emissions by 11% compared to 2015. RATP Group is committed to creating a more inclusive, ecological, and human city every day. What we mean by this is we believe that mobility is an essential lever in responding to the increase in societal and environmental challenges in tomorrow's cities. Regarding energy transition, RATP's aim is to deploy their Bus 2025 plan. The aim is to offer 100% clean bus networks, making the Île-de-France region a global reference in very low carbon urban public road transport. This is a major challenge that is mobilizing the entire company, as it involves 4,700 buses and 25 bus garages. The fleet of 4,700 buses will therefore be totally renewed, with the long-term objective being to have a fleet composed of 50% between biogas buses and electric buses. As a major player in sustainable cities, RATP also leads various innovative projects in favor of the ecological transition in cities. For example, on one of our metro lines in Paris, heat in the tunnel is recuperated and used to warm a building with 20 housing units on top of it. This mechanism makes it possible to cover 37% of the building's heating need on average. To encourage passengers to use less carbon-intensive modes of transport instead of private cars, RATP is enhancing public transport attractiveness, notably by providing mobility services in addition to its long-standing network: carpooling, car sharing, electric scooters, and autonomous shuttles through RATP Capital Innovations investment in these areas. The additional services include more than 1,000 bicycle parking spaces near metro and tram stations. In 2018, RATP became the founding member and partner of Net Zero Initiative, a group of companies aiming to reach carbon neutrality. Their goal is to establish a carbon neutrality frame of reference for companies. This is not all. RATP Group actively supports the United Nations Global Compact, which brings together companies and organizations around a set of guiding principles. Of course, I'm not going to go through these 17 items, but RATP Group also contributes to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In fact, the group has taken action on all 17 of these programs. Working in cities across the world with key collaborators and transport authorities, we are understanding the deeper needs of our passengers it helps us to contribute to sustainable cities. We do this by addressing the challenges and contribution we can make to climate change locally. So speaking local, let's us now speak about how we are addressing and taking this sustainability approach and implementing it into our London operations, and what that means in terms of contribution that we are making to the City of London, working with TfL and the government. Put simply, for us as a business in London, there is a clear need for us to look at electrification, not just from a business case perspective, but also because consumers are more aware about climate change. It affects their spending power. As a bus operator within the community, we have a role to play to better the lives of our passengers. And it is part of our purpose in helping Londoners to get to their destinations in an efficient, safe, effective manner, but also with a low emission of CO2. By 2021, Transport for London is going to increase the low emission zone. That means every one of our tender submission has to meet low emission standards. We know this is the right approach. By the journey has not been without challenges, but the journey is not without challenges. Look at this old garage. Our first garage has been in operations since 1903. And here you can see Shepherd's Bush garage, our first electric garage, which has been serving London since 1907. You see, it's in the middle of the city, and we still we want to stay there, and we want to develop an electric garage over there, and it is the case. With the wealth of history our garage has, it also comes with a big need for modernization. With that comes the complexity of space, the infrastructure of garages, and also identifying how and where we can place electric points for charging our electric buses overnight. In addition, whilst the work is ongoing, we still have an operation to run. So managing the logistics around this takes a great deal of resources and teamwork, especially being located in the heart of urban London, like Shepherd's Bush is. Earlier this year, we launched a first double-deck electric bus route, the number 94. This is a key route that runs out from Shepherd's Bush and all the way into central London. This route joins two existing single-deck electric routes and now means our Shepherd's Bush garage is well on its way to zero emission. More than 70% of the garage is electrified. Of course, we cannot forget the backbone of our business, our engineering, operational staff, and drivers. For every electric route we run, we need 3 drivers across 24-hour shift. That means attracting the right talent to help keep operations moving seamlessly. From being out of the road, the scheduling shift turnovers, and an engineering force that are skilled in all their health and safety checks and protocols. Have in mind that for us, it's also change of skills in the engineering. We don't look at diesel anymore. We need electricians. Because of our success with Shepherd's Bush and the electric routes we ran from there, we recently bid for a number of routes from Transport for London, all of which were awarded. Half of these routes will be converted to zero emissions operations in what is believed to be the largest electric bus tender award in London. That involves placing in order over 153 additional electric buses, bringing our total electric bus fleet to over 218 buses out of 1,000. What is really clear for our recent tenders award is that we are a partner of choice for TfL, a key bus operator in London, and there is trust as a contributing partner to help build a sustainable city across London's bus operators network. Next year is going to be a busy year. Having the right partners and suppliers is key to our success. The electric bus market in the UK is still new in comparison to other countries, so having the right suppliers is critical to rely on from a safety, health, and efficiency perspective, of course. plus benefiting from the group expertise really does help us in contributing to London's success in building a smart and sustainable city. Therefore, electrification plays a critical part of our business and partnership with TfL. By the end of next year, 2021, 20% of our entire fleet will be clean, fully electric, with 4 electric garages and 13 routes. This will make us the largest operator of electric buses across London. This puts us as a leader to help TfL achieve its goals. It is the proof that TfL trusts our ability to deliver such as a massive infrastructure and operational project, not just for them, but for Londoners too. All of this takes a tremendous amount of work, of course. What was encouraging to find was recently RATP of London was recognized and shortlisted for the Sustainability Award of the Franco-British Award run by the French Chamber. It is a non-bus industry award and it signals that we are in the right path. Whilst 2021 is going to be an incredibly busy and transformative year for us as a business, what we are doing is for the greater good for our planet, our region, our passengers, employees, and communities. So that's my last words. And of course, we're ready to get your questions.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much, Catherine, for that passionate presentation. You can just see your interest and passion coming out of all those slides and the way you spoke about them. There's something that that struck me is that a lot of progress that is made in the emission controls and the fuel economy is driven by heavy taxation in the transportation industry and the automobile industry. And there are a lot of fines for non-compliance. Would you say that these policies or these taxation requirements have driven RATP to understand their goals and ambitions, or was that something that the company wanted to comply with and go beyond that? What would you say?
Well, you know, as a passionate of transport, public transport is we all know the right solution for big cities. I mean, moving people. So taxation of cars is always good for transport, but we are not. Let's say we are not against cars. We need to work together. I mean, the solutions are not from one industry to be against the other one. I think the cities have to be some place where people like to live and can make the choices. But we also need the support from government and cities, local authority, to make sure that in fact we promote public transport, because it is the way for less emission, less carbon emission. It's not the only solution. That's why I think it's a combination of a solution that makes I think that brings the solution. But I'm sure Lord Deben has a view on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, thank you for that, Catherine. I think for Lord Deben, if you can answer Catherine's question along with, on a similar note, looking at the future of carbon taxation in relation to the European Union emissions trading system. Because on the similar lines of taxation, what I would like to ask you is that if the UK leaves the EU without a deal, what is the future of this carbon tax, emissions tax? What are your views on this?
Well, I don't think it's dependent on deal or no deal. I mean, the truth is that we will have some sort of emissions trading system. We in the Climate Change Committee have recommended that it would be best to remain as part of the structure that we have at the moment. If we don't do that, then we need to have something that is very close to that and would be running in parallel. Carbon trading and carbon taxation both make a contribution. We have both. and we're going to have to be tougher and tighter with both. But I don't think of all the things that are likely to change very much, I don't think that will change very much, because the truth is that there is a problem with trading schemes, and that is that they need to have as wide an application as possible if you want to deal with the problem of volatility. And it's quite interesting that the Chinese, who have several schemes, have tried to make all those schemes concurrent, so to speak, with the European Union one, because they perfectly clearly see that this is going to be an international situation. And I think we'll find that beyond the European Union.
Thank you for that explanation. It's good to know that the future looks optimistic at the moment, and we are going to follow through the things that we were following in the past. Now over to the audience. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the Q&A feature of Zoom, so we can pick it up from there and ask our great speakers about your questions.
Nidhi, I can pick up one that was actually in the chat, but please do put your questions in the Q&A, and they start to come. It's a question for our Lord Deben. On the topic of the carbon budget, there was actually a relatively technical question, but I think it leads to a bigger answer. It would appear that those budgets cover territorial emissions and not those based on consumption, meaning, for instance, import. What is the rationale behind that, and do all countries sort of like count it the same way?
Well, yes. I mean, the reason we use we don't use consumption emissions is that you use the emissions which you have total control over. We have no control over, or indeed knowledge of very often, the emissions which lie behind any product which you import. So the first thing is you have your territorial emissions, as you've called them, because those are the things that you can control. And secondly, that's the measurement which internationally has been agreed, so that you can compare what you do with other people. So when we put forward our nationally determined contribution, which we put forward before Paris and which we're now going to try to ratchet up before Glasgow, then that has to be done on the basis of these territorial emissions, the ones you've got control over, partly, of course, because otherwise you would double count them. But that doesn't mean to say that you can ignore consumption emissions. So the Climate Change Committee, on a regular basis, assesses the consumption emissions and looks at those and tries to describe the interrelation, because what you don't want to do is to reduce your territorial emissions by increasing your consumption emissions. Now, so far we have not done that. There doesn't seem to be leakage, which is the thing that one might call it, but we are determined that that shan't happen. And of course, consumption emissions are crucially important. And one of the things that we're going to have to do is to be much clearer about what are the emissions which are connected to goods that we import from elsewhere.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it is, like you said, quite important to understand our consumption at the same time. There's another question that has come through from one of our viewers that's going to Catherine. The question says, what happens with all the diesel buses that are retired from the RATP routes for after electrification?
So there are constraints in London that we can't keep vehicles after 14 years of use. To be fair with you, diesel vehicles are very polluting vehicles. So usually either they have another life for a sort of a third life, I would say, because 14 years for us is two contracts. potentially, then they can have a third life or a fourth life. If they are well maintained, they can go to 20-25 years, but they are polluting assets. For us, they are completely amortized at the end of their life. And either it happens also that we scrap them because they have no value on the market. It depends on the market. That's a very good question, by the way, because for many years, old buses were from modern countries were going to poor countries.
Yes.
And it's still the case. We have to say that. So, but let's say also in terms of sustainability, we don't just throw away the assets. They have another life. Second-hand and reusable assets are also a way for sustainability for the future.
That's a very good answer. Just on that, from my end, if I can add on to that. So do you actually look at the embodied carbon of your vehicles and your assets, and look at the materials, where they're coming from, and look at the circular economy aspect of materials?
So let's on the let's say British market for the manufacturers, that's a little bit of an issue. The UK market is in fact a small market, and the number of manufacturers producing electric vehicles is reduced. Currently our first 65 buses are coming. In fact, the body is built. The body is built in England by a British company, but the batteries and the chassis are coming from China. So the Chinese are really well advanced in terms of electric buses. You can't imagine the number of electric buses that are in operation in China. It's just mad. The numbers are just you're completely dizzy when you hear these kind of numbers. We are far from that. I would say, as I am, of course, we are investing, and we are a partner of TfL. We are investing in electric buses. I think that the future is also to think about and to look at what do we do with the batteries? What is the second life of the batteries? What do we do with our old batteries that have no energy? So these are real concern, and there are some business models that are and that we are looking at to make sure that there is a life after the life of the batteries for the bus, that they can be regenerate and then have another opportunity to be used. So this is a concern for us, because we cannot think for the next 2, 3, 5 years. We need also to be aware that in 10, 15 years, we will have to deal with other issues in terms of waste management and stuff like that.
Thank you very much. We've got quite a few questions coming, but actually I'd like just to ask one to both of you. We heard during your presentations the word of that we have to pay the price because we were the early polluters. But each time there is a challenge, there is an opportunity. And so to both of you, I would like you to tell us what could be the opportunities concretely in your business and for the attendants to collaborate. And just let me tell you who we have in audience. And by the way, we have, I think, reached over 100 registration today. We have a lot of students from UCL, LSE, LBS, University of Kent. We've got representatives from big businesses, Bouygues, Accor, SPI, Capgemini, Legrand, Veolia. We've got a global head of sustainability, lawyers, NGOs, and representatives from charities. And we have many, many representatives from highly promising and high growth businesses. So Catherine, when we talked about diesel, we had a question about hydrogen. How could we collaborate with you on that? And Lord Deben, thinking about COP26, and you made many references to the Franco-British I would say, partnerships, how could we contribute to the effort of the UK government to ensure that COP26 is a huge success? Catherine, would you like to start?
So me first. So on hydrogen and also on other issues, for me, I have a lot of questions also on how I can be better, more sustainable on my waste management, industrial waste and stuff like that. So I am really aware that it is an area where I need in London to be much more efficient or much more sustainable. On hydrogen, we are today not part of the first trials that are happening in London, but the group has some trials in France. Hydrogen brings other issues as well. I mean, with electric buses, you have batteries. With hydrogen, you need to produce hydrogen. You need to bring it. You need to change the bottles. It's a little bit of a different type of operation, but TfL has started a trial, and it's one of our another operator in London who's having this trial to lead. It has just started. I think we are really at the beginning of this trial, but happy to discuss about that because we have some experience within the group. It still hasn't proven its full efficiency, if I may, for now.
I've got one last question.
Nidhi, hold on. Lord Deben, on COP26.
Sorry.
Well, as far as COP26 is concerned, what we have to do together is help to raise the contributions of every country in the world. We need France, just as Britain, to make ambitious offers which we are going to meet. I mean, that's the first prime thing. Second thing is, I hope France and Britain will work together to insist that the United Nations in future includes aircraft and shipping emissions in the nationally determined contributions, because if you exclude those two emitters, you are excluding a hugely important section. And of course, we're all committed to net zero, which includes them. But if we are proceeding towards net zero without including them, we'll suddenly find ourselves with this real gap. So the second thing I would hope we were doing was working together on that. And the third thing, which I think Britain and France particularly can do with its history, is to see that we are increasing helping the developing countries not to buy old buses and go on polluting, nor indeed to do what happened with the Danes, who were very proud because they said they had just closed their last coal-fired power station. This was some years ago, and then revealed that they also were very proud that they had given it to India, which was exactly the wrong statement altogether. So together we really have got to try to help people. And that's why I am ashamed and angry at the fact that the British government has announced today that it is reducing its overseas aid. Overseas aid is a crucial part of what we do. We don't include, as a matter of fact, our contribution to international help for climate change in overseas aid. But obviously, overseas aid is a payment that we make as rich countries to the poorest. And I do think that at a time in which we have been hit so hard by COVID, the idea that you take some of the money away from those who have been hit harder, as the developing countries have, with less ability to be able to meet them, I think is a very great sadness. And I'm pleased to see that a number of people have said that they're not prepared to support it.
Thank you, Lord Deben. And so that you know, we've got representative from the French embassy on this call today. So I'm sure they may have heard your words. Nidhi?
On that note, I think we've overrun the time, so I'm conscious of time. But I'd like to thank Catherine and Lord Deben for sharing your insight on this, on the challenges that are ahead of us to reach net zero, and also the audience for asking all the wonderful questions. I think we do feel a bit optimistic about the future, especially with the 10-point plan that is out. And I hope the viewers have got some takeaways after this session, whether it's to understand that the urgency, it's now, the change has to happen now and cannot wait for tomorrow, or also the most important one, we need to attack the disease. So I think quite insightful discussions today about challenges that we have to face and overcome to achieve net zero. Thank you again. Before we conclude, I would like to mention a few things. The first thing is there's a short 2-minute survey for all the audience who attended today to give your feedback. Please do not forget to respond to that feedback. The second one is that this is our last session of the year for the French Chamber of Commerce Climate Change and Sustainability Forum. So we will be in touch with you with regards to the new and ever exciting sessions for the new year. With the context of COP26, we will have, and we intend to have, quite a few sessions in the next year to share information and best practices on this topic of climate change and sustainability. So do keep in touch, and we will be in touch with you as well. And last but not the least, the French Chamber of Commerce is always looking for expanding and building a strong community of businesses. So it's a great networking platform to connect and support businesses. Please go onto their website to get more details. And if you want to become a member, please do contact them. So as I said, this is the last session of the year. So we wish you that you have a good end of this year. And hopefully on this positive notes, maybe this wish is coming a bit too early for most of you. Have a great Christmas and a new year, safe with your families. Thank you and take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Lord Deben. Thank you, Nidhi. Goodbye, everybody.